Getting your first job or your first break's the same thing. It's a lot like getting married, okay? How many relationships do you need to work out in your life?
Yeah.
One.
Today, I'm sitting down with one of the best here. This is someone whose career is a masterclass in building leverage early through banking and then compounding that. Max here started his career in the world of banking and investing. He worked at Deutsche Bank and Fifth Partners. And so from there, Max moved into top tier strategy consulting. He went to the best of the best, McKinsey, at Quantum Black, which is their AI arm. And that positioned him now to start a career at Amazon and AWS. Really excited to get a front row seat into the AI revolution from Max's perspective. Welcome to the show.
I had a friend, I lived with him for close to 12 months. He convinced me that the starting point to a successful career was something in finance, investment banking specifically. So I came home still not knowing what those terms meant, and I was like, I'm gonna be a banker. Like, there's no way I'm missing this. My wife and daughter were nice enough to follow me, and they lived in a hotel room for 7 months while we worked on this project together. So what's happening now is knowledge is becoming commoditized.
To some extent, AI is the great leveler.
I don't think that your job's as in jeopardy as others. I think it's just going to become more competitive because other analysts are getting good at using these tools.
Welcome to another episode of Wall Street Diaries. This is a podcast about extraordinary individuals who launched their career on Wall Street and then use that as a springboard to build world-class careers. And so we're bringing you the stories of people who turned a foundation in finance into something remarkable. And today I'm sitting down with one of the best here. This is someone whose career is a masterclass in building leverage early through banking and then compounding that across finance, strategy, and now the world's poppiest subject, generative AI. So Max here started his career in the world of banking and investing. He worked at Deutsche Bank and Fifth Partners while also gaining experience across VC and investing in the US and China. So it's truly an international career. But alongside that, he also co-founded and operated a real estate investment company. He took on real operating responsibility early on in the career, before many people would actually even enter their first-time role. And so from there, Max moved into top-tier strategy consulting. He went to the best of the best, McKinsey, where he rose from business analyst to engagement manager, just like a rocket ship trajectory on there, and then finished his time at McKinsey recently at Quantum Black, which is their AI arm. And that positioned him now to start a career at Amazon and AWS, where he's leading a lot of the go-to-market efforts for generative AI startups, helping founders that are turning their frontier models into something scalable, enterprise grade. And so I'm super excited to talk with Max today about the blend between AI and startups and finance and what the beginning in investment banking started. And of course, we'll probably have a little bit of a conversation about consulting versus banking in there as well. So really excited to get a front row seat into the AI revolution from Max's perspective. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I like the way you framed that. Make me sound very smart.
Well, not too hard with you, Max. So let's start at the very beginning here. We'll just jump right in and get going with the interest in investment banking. And so without getting too personal, I just want to kind of hear what was the thought process about investment banking in the first place. Like a lot of students, when they show up at college, like they don't know what it is and they don't know what a cool like launch pad investment banking can be for their careers. And so from the very beginning, how did you first get exposed to the idea of investment banking? What drew you to it?
It's a good question. So growing up, no one in my family did anything finance related. I really actually had no idea what it was. I heard that Mitt Romney was a venture capitalist, which turns out that wasn't the case. He was in private equity. So like that's about all I knew. And then when I was 18 years old, I went on a mission for my church. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormon, and I lived in Taiwan. And while I was there, I had a friend. I lived with him for close to 12 months. And he had family members who had done everything from high finance to entrepreneurship to careers in politics and even Hollywood. And he somehow had boiled it down and like convinced me that the starting point to a successful career was something in finance, investment banking specifically, or private equity. So I came home still not knowing what those terms meant, and I was like, I'm going to be a banker, and started school and went to the investment banking club. That's where I met Max, actually. Max was one of my first mentors. Yeah, that's how it started. I really, I think what convinced me up front, I was convinced that to do something big, I didn't have any definition to what that meant yet. Finance was a great starting point. And I think that was accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and honestly, I can't disagree with the results, but what in the world did this guy say that made you think that investment banking, in fact, was the right place to start?
It's hard to remember. This is now over 10 years ago. I think I again, I didn't understand what I didn't like, not to give too much context, but when I was on this mission, I didn't have access to like the internet. I wasn't like doing research. I was pretty focused on what I was doing there. And so I didn't really have a lot of context and like insight into like what is this, but I understood, roughly speaking, investors buy and sell companies, and they buy them, they grow them, they sell them. That was kind of all I understood. But it was enough. It was kind of I was going off of vibes, Max. I was a bit less academic at this point in my life.
And frankly, that's 80% of the students I work with at Wall Street Mastermind are also going off the vibes camp. And then they only learn what investment banking is afterwards. And so actually, it was the same thing for me, where it probably actually wasn't until about 6 months into banking that I like finally wrapped my head around like what is investment banking, because it's so complicated. It's so freaking complicated, Max, because they've got like the M&A side of things. You've got like equity capital markets, you've got debt capital markets, you've got like product groups, you've got coverage groups, and then you've also got these like sort of quasi banking things like sales and trading and equity research, which are also investment banking, but they're not like what I say when I mean investment banking most of the time. And so it's very complicated, and like of course I'm not going to expect someone to know that. And realistically, the thing that got me into it was like knowing, okay, this is hard. I like doing hard things. 2, this is prestigious. And then 3rd, like it's going to provide a really solid financial foundation. Although of course you can't talk about that in the interview so much.
Yeah. And I think one thing you touched on there was like the prestige part. I think for me, although it makes me kind of sick to say that, I like to like hang my hat on not caring about prestige, but like factually at that point in my life, I was coming back. I went to BYU, which was a great school. But like I had a little bit of FOMO. I was like, what about, these kids at Harvard, Stanford, and like some of these schools that I was really intrigued by. I was like, well, I want to get to the same place that some of them are going, like even if I'm not there, I'm going to get there. And so that was part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like totally fair. I obviously also, I went to BYU as well, and it's a good school, but it's not the world's best Ivy League school or something like that. And it's got a really strong banking program. It's really got strong finance program. But to some extent, there is like a hustle there because it's not Harvard, it's not Wharton, it's not the S&T program or something like that. It's not NYU. And so you have to prove yourself. And that chip on the shoulder, I actually think makes the best of the best at BYU exceptional, because there's a hustle. And so I'm curious, what of those levers like was most compelling to you? Like obviously there's the prestige element of investment banking where it's like it's extraordinarily hard to get into. Like I think JP Morgan had a 0.6% or 0.7% acceptance rate this last year. And so it's like it's actually harder to get into that than most of these Ivy League schools I just mentioned. But at the same time, like there's also the huge financial rewards, and then there's the sheer intellectual interest of like getting to work on. I think I worked on like $75 billion of M&A in like 5 years that I was in banking and private equity, which is like pretty cool. And so like, what was it that like actually drew it to you? Like, what did investment banking represent to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the driving force for me has often been curiosity. I think I've always, just wondered, there's got to be more out there. I would, growing up in Utah, I would like, watch TV, and it's always like, some newscaster out of DC or New York or something. And I'd been to New York on like a trip, but like I was like, what, like, how do you become one of those faces on the TV or do something that like people are focused on? And it wasn't so much I wanted to be on the TV. I wanted to be on Bloomberg. It's just like, what are they talking about? How do I understand that? How do I understand that world? How do I play in that world? And as I got back and went to school, and I was seeing kind of career outcomes of some of the upperclassmen, something I started to realize is like, you get to choose kind of where you start your career. You get to choose the size of playground you play on. Mm-hmm. And so like you can go, I often say when I talk to younger kids, like you can choose a small playground and you can go be the king of that playground, or you can choose a big playground and you can go understand that playground and compete to be the king, but you might not be the king, but you'll at least like understand the big playground. And you can always go back to the smaller playground if you decide later in life, but at least you'll have this experience of having understood the big playground. And I think that's like, that curiosity is something that's really driven me. And it's funny because I don't think anyone's morally better for going to the big playground, but I have seen a lot of people that never took the chance to go to the big playground and they stay on the small playground, meaning like, maybe they stayed back in Utah or Wisconsin or Florida or even, just wherever they grew up. And if they haven't had the chance to see, they're always going to wonder, and even if I go back, at least I've seen it now and it's been fun. So I think curiosity has been a big driver for me.
I totally get that curiosity. And like, frankly, it was the same thing for me. Like as a teenager, like I just like wanted to go check out the world, see the big flashy city and things like that. And some parts of it are really incredible. Other parts make me appreciate home more than anything. But at the same time, like you said, there's that novelty and that curiosity about like being able to see what like people are talking about and like what's going on and see the best that the world has to offer in some ways. But it's also, it goes back to that sort of like pride of working on something important enough for people to care. And I remember early on in banking, one of the coolest moments I had was working on the IBM Red Hat deal. And this was a $34 billion deal. Like at the time, that was the largest software deal ever done. And like adjusted for inflation, it's probably larger than that these days, even though it seems like there's a lot of mega mergers. But like it was really freaking cool to see the thing that I had been working on 120 hours a week for months, like show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and be like, hey, I did that. I'm not quite like the talking head on TV because I was just the analyst like building the financial model. But nonetheless, it was like a really cool chance to kind of see that,
Yeah, you at least understand the world behind the talking head, right?
Yeah.
It's like a ticket to seeing and experience things you've never been exposed to before.
Yeah. And I love that playground analogy too. But before you could get into the big playground, like you obviously had to grind for it. And one of the most interesting things about your career to me, Max, is that you didn't do that the traditional way. You studied math. And so let's take a second and move to the second chapter here, which was like, okay, you wanted to do investment banking. How did you get there? And so you chose to study math at BYU, which is by no means the most obvious major for someone targeting Wall Street. So pitch me. Why is math the best investment banking major?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think this is why my career varied, like kind of strayed away from banking eventually, is because it's hard to pack everything into a cohesive story for me. The curiosity makes that tough because I'm always jumping out of bounds. Yep. But so why math? So the first thing is I had like a very personal experience where I basically, how do I explain? So I just had this realization that the most impactful thing I could do is learn to create and learn to build. And so what I did from there, so this is, sorry, a little bit of context. So stepping back, I did my freshman year, all finance prerequisites. I got into the finance program. And then I went and I did a freshman internship, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. And I loved the internship. And the internship I was at a private equity. It was roughly private equity. They actually do like more like syndicate type investing. But I interned there and I mostly did operations. And I really enjoyed the building of the business. It was beautiful to me. So I came home. I'm like, I want to build. I was fascinated by tech. And so I was like, I want to do something where I can, take as much science, like understand science, something in STEM. So I wrote a list of all the STEM companies, or all the STEM majors I was interested in. And I was trying to whittle them down, but I just frankly couldn't, because they were all fascinating to me. And so there was this major called Applied and Computational Mathematics. And you got to kind of choose an emphasis, whether it be electrical engineering or physics or whatever you wanted it to be. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do because I don't have to say no to any science. I can kind of dabble in several. So that's how I got to math. Like really what finally kind of, like pushed me over the edge was in my math classes, like learning the concept of analytical absolute truth was like beautiful. Like there's just nothing like it. I don't know if it actually exists in the real world, but it's beautiful in in math classes. And then the second one was coming across like certain like concepts. Like there's this principle of that you learn very early on in like my first proofs course of like countable versus uncountable infinite sets. And that was like beautiful to me. That bent my mind in a new way. And then finally it allowed me to sample some computer science, engineering, physics courses, etc. The result of all this is that I wasn't really afraid to do difficult things mentally. I think like growing up, I always I liked physical challenges, played a lot of sports, and I like developed that same thing in a parallel intellectual universe where I was like, okay, like throw anything at me, I can figure it out. It might take me some time, but I can figure it out. So I think that's a little bit of the story behind why math.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And I see this theme of curiosity emerging throughout your career, why you've taken so many different paths and tried so many different things. Like that rings super true, getting to know you as a person here. Um, and I also really love the way that you approach your major, not necessarily as a means to an end, but like as an absolute like value in and of itself, where you're like, hey, I just want to learn this. I want to grow. I want to develop this. And that's really beautiful. Like there's something very idealistic about that. And honestly, I kind of wish I'd done the same thing myself, because I did study finance and I just plowed on through it. I was like investment banking 24/7. I graduated in a little over 2 years because I was like so focused on just like getting into the industry so quickly. But I do think that like that's your one chance to really just take time to like dedicatedly learn at a university setting. And so I hope that was like very fulfilling for you throughout the entire period. But tell me a little bit about how that impacted the recruiting process. Like, how did math help or hurt in the recruiting process? And once you're in banking?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was absolutely essential, I think, especially up front. So I did that private equity internship, and then I did another. So, and then when I switched my major, it tacked on another year, which ended up being more than a year because I did an entrepreneurial venture, which we'll talk about later. But like, it tacked on another year. So I had 2 freshman internships, both in private equity. And then when I was officially going to do like a sophomore, like I was back on track and I was doing a sophomore internship. It was actually at Deutsche Bank Sales and Trading. And so I went and worked on the FX derivatives desk. And like the fact that I had a mathematic background was absolutely accretive there. Like there's no question. It's a very mathematical, like kind of technical, function at the bank. And so that was very critical. But then as far as like when you take a class like complex algebra, or like analysis, those problems, at least for me, I'm not the best mathematician, but I had to sit and think for so long. And so when it came to diving into like technicals or any sort of an interview prep, like I was able to actually come up to speed pretty quick, just because I'd had that practice of trying to think about these things, especially in finance, where a lot of these things you're trying to wrap your mind around, like transactions. I remember that being very difficult because I'd never been a part of one. I'd never seen one. Yeah. And so like sitting there and studying these questions, it's very abstract feeling. You have to kind of like think about things you haven't actually seen in action. And so I think the mathematical muscle helped me there. And then the other thing is like once you're in the interview, if you mention you studied math or you studied computer science and you're still there and you're able to answer the questions, that never is a mark against you. I think people always like that.
Yeah, no, so I totally agree with that. Where you get like as an interviewer, because I've been on the other side of the table. I've interviewed probably hundreds of candidates at this point for Lazard, for Catalyst, for Vector Capital, for other firms, and you see so many finance and econ majors. Just like untold numbers of them. And it's not a bad thing. It shows that like, okay, here's someone who's like taking the game seriously. They know what they need to do. They're studying these things because they care about, they want a career in it. But every once in a while you get like, an applied physics major or something like that. And I'm just like, okay, you might have like a 3.56 GPA or something like that, but I bet that 3.56 was harder to get than the 3.95 for some random accounting major at like a decent school or something like that. And so there's generally like a willingness to overlook GPA lower, first off. And then there's also like a curiosity where I'm just like, okay, how did like an applied physics major end up in my office interviewing for private equity? Yeah. And so it sounds like you benefited from that.
Well, and the other thing, just to pile onto that, is I think something I often tell kids when I talk to them is when you're getting a job, if you get selected for an interview, it means you're qualified, right? So you're going to be in the room with 20 to 30 kids who are all qualified on paper. The next task is making them remember you. And there's things that are table stakes. Like you have to be able to answer the questions they ask you. But using those questions as like a medium to showcase who you are is really, really what I like to think of the questions as, is like it's an opportunity. I'm going to tell you the answer, but through my answer, I'm going to weave things in that make you remember me. And, talking about things you studied, that's just something that makes you stick out in people's minds. If they were in a room with like 30 kids, 28 of those kids studied finance or econ, and there's one kid who studied biology or something like that just, that's really distinctive, and they'll remember that when they go back and have their conversations after.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I think that's a very good point about memorability. And so whatever you are as a candidate, like one of the things I really like to do at Wall Street Mastermind when I'm working with people on their stories is like I help them figure out what their angle is. It's the same thing with all competitive selection processes. Like I did the same thing actually when I was applying for Stanford for my MBA. It's like I thought very carefully about like who am I? Like what's the simplified story of who I am? Because nobody's gonna take the time to like learn who you are, Max. Like they're not gonna sit down there and they're not gonna like learn about your background, about your family, about who you are, what you like to do, your beliefs, your values. They're just going to like learn a very simplified narrative of your life. And that's part of why we're talking and having a longer form conversation today is I want to break through that a little bit because the simplified narrative is like banker to consultant to AI expert, like, that doesn't capture the richness and the complexity, but that's kind of what you have to bring to an interview. You have to simplify it down, dumb it down to you have one core idea that you present to the people that you're talking with. So love that storytelling mechanism. But I also want to talk about the consulting applicability because consulting is not as quantitative as like a sales and trading career or as investment banking can be. And so was math useful for consulting?
Yeah, so I think math was incredible. I argue math is useful for everything, but was it useful for consulting? Absolutely. I think so. So when I sat down for my case interviews, it felt like it fit much more like a glove based on what I'd studied than investment banking interviews did. Investment banking interviews are very what's the word? There is like a quantitative aspect to them, but it's very much like kind of there's a process to them. Like most of the answers, you walk through the three statements, like the classic like $10 depreciation question. Like that's, there's a very rote formula you follow. When it comes to consulting, it's very open-ended. And that's how a lot of like upper level math courses are, where it's, the difference in consulting is there's 100 different answers. In math, there's still only one answer, but like the way you get there, you're piecing together different theorems and things like that. And so it's very open-ended to work towards that answer. So that was very fun for me to be back in like a kind of open-ended sandbox to like figure something out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt a lot like writing a proof. So
yeah, I can see that. Although, like, just to be clear, like $10 of depreciation doesn't cut it these days anymore. Like, it's a little bit funny. I know we've talked about this at various points, but the recruiting cycles have gotten so much more competitive and so much more difficult that like questions that I used to think were like pretty hard, technical questions are like regularly coming up in like first round interviews for a lot of the students I work with. And so the bar has just gotten so much higher because we've had basically a flat number of investment banking analyst jobs, and the number of applicants has absolutely skyrocketed, where you get like 600,000 people applying to some of these top investment banks for like 4,000, 5,000 positions or something like that. And so I do actually think it's becoming more quantitative, more technical, in a way that probably the math major will actually even more support in the future. And just like getting numerically literate is super, super important. I bet that made you like a pretty good financial modeler too, huh?
I think so. I think I'd have colleagues who said my models were too like kind of open-ended and creative. But I think I've also had colleagues who appreciate it. So it was good. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Creative mean in a model context? I shudder to think.
Well, so like in consulting, you come across a problem and you build a model. It's not like you have your kind of static like formatted model. But I think like that was my approach to consulting. But I think a lot of my colleagues would still agree. Yeah, like Max, you solve different problems, but we still have like some templates that you should roughly follow. And I was kind of like building my own creative things. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. The math absolutely helped in the modeling. No questions asked. I was going to say the other thing is like when you're in, I just wanted to pile on to something you said about like, kids you interview these days, or kind of how you've seen people really, this ability to solve open-ended problems is like very critical. As I've tried to help do some interviews, help kids prep for interviews, that is the thing that sticks out the most, is someone who can think critically, and like can go into a situation that's not super clear cut, and like work through, like think in real time and think about things that aren't trivial, that aren't obvious. That is another way that you can really differentiate yourself. So I think math helped me with that. I think a lot of kids are figuring out how to do that without math. It's surprising me. And so, yeah, that's something I thought of.
Totally agree. And can I just go back and say one thing, Max, really quickly? Don't build creative financial models. You do not want your models to be considered creative in banking. In consulting, that might be a little bit more appropriate, but that's just too funny.
Yeah, and let me fix what I meant by creative. Like sometimes I used Excel in creative ways. Maybe we'll say that. Not like the model wasn't creative. It was like we weren't valuing a company. We were, you know, I used it creatively as a tool. Don't build creative financial models. I'll double down on that. You want it to be very
Yeah,
fit for purpose. So
I
yes,
love that. But the
not
more
trying
that we
to
talk
preach all that.
the more we talk about math, though, the more convinced I become, like, this actually does make a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, like, all you're doing as a banker is math. Like, you're just doing simple math. It's not like finite algebra. You're not doing integrals and derivatives and things like that, but you are very much doing a fairly large number of, like, theoretically complex, you know, algebra, multiplication, division, like addition. Like, the mathematical processes aren't so hard, but the logic behind it that is the crux of mathematics really is. In fact, do you want to know the hardest investment banking interview question I've ever received?
Tell me.
It's 2 times 2. And then the guy said, okay, what about times 2? Times 2.
Yeah.
Times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2. And so I'm like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. And then I just kept going until like my brain literally exploded. I think I got up into like the either hundreds of thousands or like millions even. And then my digit span just like lost. But a math major, I just have to imagine that your understanding of like digits and like approximate quantities would just be a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You're obviously doing a fair amount of computation in math. I think the other thing that's super helpful is I think one of the most difficult things, and Max, you correct me if I'm wrong. I switched after internship phase of banking, but tracking like kind of inputs, dependencies, and models and things like that. That's what math is all about. When you're building like a proof, it's all about like, I proved this piece, there's an input, here's another input, and you kind of, you have to piece this thing together. And I think models, like, that's something that's definitely true, is to be able to keep a full picture of why do all these assumptions lead to these outputs in my model, and to explain that to a client. That's like a very rigorous process. And learning to think that way holistically and have a whole picture at one time, that's like a very critical skill.
I love that. Yeah. Well, so we've definitely talked about the math thing for a while now, and it may just very well be true that math is the investment banking major. But I do want to talk a little bit more about like the actual sort of transition to like investment banking, like how you got there. And so first off, you actually started your career, your internship with Fifth Partners in Dallas, which is a good bank. Obviously, like it's regional, and it was in like a regional office and stuff like that. And frankly, that's very common for a lot of investment banking analysts who are like starting to try and build that experience, especially not for their junior internship. And so tell me a little bit about how that opportunity came together. Like, how did you manage to get a banking internship prior to like the classic junior year investment banking internship?
Yeah, this one's a really interesting story, and it's not one that I feel is like easily replicable. I feel like I was very fortunate, and some people took a chance on me. Because I gave you my context. Growing up, didn't really have much context on what finance was. I came home with this idea and straight vibes of like, I want to go do this thing. And then I got into school, and I took some finance prerequisites. I think I was still trying to piece together like what actually is this? Like, I'm answering the questions on the paper, but like, I'm still trying to build the mental model of like what would I actually be doing? And on top of that, I was paying for my own school, and so I was working a lot on the side. In fact, I worked at the Blue Line Deli, which is where I used to go to Max for investment banking advice. But prior to getting the advice from Max, I was actually making sandwiches at the deli. So yeah, so I upgraded though. I wasn't at the Blue Line Deli forever. I eventually went to work at this. They call it's like a training center for the missionaries at the church. So I spoke Mandarin on my mission. So I was working there more as like a secretary than a language instructor. But it was a good college freshman year job. And while I was there was my manager. She had nothing to do with finance. She'd worked at the training center her entire career. She said, "Max, are you interested in finance?" And I was like, or she kind of knew I was interested in business. And she's like, "What in business? Like investing? Something along those lines?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, there's a guy I want to connect you with." I was like, all right, like that's cool. Like, it was interesting because she was obviously very detached from anything finance as well, but I was like, that would be great. Happy to talk to anyone. And she ended up connecting me with this guy named Jamie. And Jamie was a fascinating figure. Jamie had worked at the same place during college, like all 4 years. He didn't do anything finance related his entire undergrad experience. I think he was an English major. And then when he graduated, he got connected somehow with this guy Jeff. Jeff's a savant. This guy's incredible. He went to Bain, then he went to Bain Cap, then he went to GSB, and then but he came from like a very rural background. Anyways, I'm giving you too much context, but long story short, this guy Jeff took Jamie right as he was starting a fund and just trained Jamie and taught Jamie everything. And that was kind of their model. They liked taking people who were very fresh, not a lot of experience, and like kind of molding them to be the type of analyst they wanted. So anyways, long story short, the question was, do you know anyone who's hardworking and humble? And my manager flagged me and they called me and they're like, hey, do you want to come intern with us? We'd love to work with you. And and that was it. And I went down to Texas. It was very, like I said, super lucky. And I learned so much from these guys, man. It was an incredible experience. It was the best first exposure to business, anything business, not just finance, I could have asked for. Deeply impactful, but it's kind of right time, right place, being hungry, being open, humble, eager. Yeah. It all worked out.
Well, and you said this isn't replicable. And I hear you, like, it's not replicable. Like, nobody's going to be working at the same, sandwich shop and then as a secretary, and like their manager's got to connect them with the guy who connects them with the guy who's like runs this bank or something like that. But there are a couple principles that I actually do think are replicable. And the first one is the hustle, like the fact that you were working hard and like putting yourself out there and doing things. Like, even if it was totally unrelated to banking, like you were working, you were getting experience, you were connecting with people who were interesting. And then the second thing that I love is that, like, you said a phrase earlier, which is, I would be happy to talk with anyone. Like, that's really at the core, like a very beautiful sentiment, because it's a very humble sentiment. It's saying, like, I'm not better than anyone else. Like, I'm interested in learning from people. It goes back to that curiosity thing. And so I think that's something that sometimes our students lack. Like, every once in a while, I get a student who's like, oh, but like this banker wants to talk to me, but they're like not at the group I'm interested in. Like, they're not at the bank that like is quite good enough for me. And I'm like, come on, guys, like get the hustle. Like, you've got to talk with these people, because there's just so many positive externalities from that. Like, you're going to learn from them. You're going to be able to build sort of second degree connections from that. And so I love the humility that comes with that. And I think that part, the hustle, the willingness to talk with anyone, the willingness to learn from anyone, that is replicable. So some really good lessons in there.
I agree. And I think the thing that people underestimate is, like, it's a lot like getting married. Okay. Like, how many relationships do you need to work out in your life?
Yeah.
It's one. And like getting a job, getting your first job or your first break's the same thing. Like, how many do you need to work out? It's just one. And so I think a lot of times when people shave off like ancillary opportunities to continue connecting with people, or they turn down a conversation, that could be the one that worked out, And so I think I've actually talked to a lot of students who they're like discouraged because like they didn't get past the higher view at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. And they're like, they give up early. And it's like, you don't need to get into Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. There's 24 great banks. And I think people underestimate that you get the one and you can go anywhere from there if you go do a good job. So
yeah. No, for sure. And this is actually something I really love to push home with students, is that the binary outcome here is not, did you get into like Goldman versus XYZ mid-market bank? Although that matters. And if you can, that's great. And like, we'll help you do that. But the bigger difference is, did you get into banking? It's a binary. It's like yes or no. And that's like really what explodes like a lot of the opportunities in terms of prestige, in terms of like interest of work, in terms of the financial outcomes, is like, can you get there at all? And then it's much easier to like transition from, mid-market bank to upper mid-market bank to bulge bracket or something like that. So really love that. Also really love your marriage analogy. But with Dallas and with Fifth Partners specifically, it sounds like a lot of it was just like serendipity, like it was right time at the right place. It was following a mentor, someone who's willing to help. But what made that role so attractive and so effective?
Yeah, so first of all, it just felt like a big break. I didn't have any other offers. I had zero offers. These guys were so nice to take a chance on me. But I think the thing that made the role the most attractive is there's this kind of a little bit of a mystique associated with this company. They they'd done a very good job in just a few years, and looking at where they are now versus when I was there, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Kind of the momentum they've carried, and the reason was they were a company that there's companies out there that have like very thick cultures, like like Bridgewater, they film everything. There's like these companies that have kind of this like almost like cult like personality to them,
Yeah.
and Fifth had a little bit of that. And they were very grounded in principle and integrity, and that just came through in all of their operations. So again, very unique first company, but I think the thing that was most attractive about it and most impactful was that they kind of taught me integrity, and they taught me how to they just taught me very sound operating principles right from the beginning. So they're like, I just remember there were like these things they would have, like, loose lips sink ships. They would say that all the time, which is like, when you're privy to information, you keep it private. You talk to the appropriate people about it. They had another one was like, and this one was, I think, borrowed from Bain, but it's like, true north. What's true north? Like, let's all align on what where we're going, and let's head there together. They were just they had like, 10 or 15 of these sayings, and they were very focused on them. And that was super impactful for me at that age.
I love that. And that honestly kind of highlights the importance of sayings, honestly, this idea of like having mottos, where it goes back to what we were saying about stories and how you as a complex person need to simplify your story into digestible idea. And so for anyone who's out there building businesses, that's kind of a good takeaway is to say, what are the principles you care about, and how can you digest that into a simplified sort of narrative that's easily communicable to other people? So something I'll be thinking about. But you made a very big jump after that. And I'm smiling here because not only did you make the transition I was just describing to going from mid-market bank to a great bulge bracket bank, but you also made a transition geographically from Dallas to New York. And so that was kind of a double backflip that you completed to go to a much more prestigious bank in a much more prestigious location. So how in the world did you make that happen?
Well, so there's actually a chapter here missing, which was, so after this internship at Fifth Partners, where I got a lot of operational experience, this is when I was curious and I switched my major. So then I extended my timeline. So I had another magic freshman year. Yeah. And I actually went to intern in Beijing. That was the China chapter there. And then from there, I think I had a compelling story enough to go to New York. But yeah, I'm happy to jump right into the New York one. Can also tell a little bit about the China one, but
sure, please
totally.
Tell us a little bit about how that connects things together.
Yeah, so the China one again. So this is another story about talking to everyone. So I did my mission I said earlier in Taiwan. So I spoke Mandarin, my church mission, that is. So I spoke Mandarin, and I always wanted that to be part of my brand. I was focused on what's the package that I will present to people as I go interview for jobs. And part of it was global focus, specifically speaks Mandarin, has exposure to China, Taiwan, etc. So I was very focused on that. I was looking for internships for that summer. I kind of realized I have this, kind of extra year to make something happen, which I think is actually kind of common. A lot of people end up taking that extra year if they need to build their story. And so this was my chance to do something really interesting. So I was looking for opportunities in China, not super easy to find. And I met this guy who was a biology major, who also spoke Mandarin, who'd worked at this private equity fund in Beijing. I met him at some conference. I can't remember. It was it's something completely unrelated to the business school, unrelated to finance, unrelated to anything. Probably some STEM conference or something. And I just chatted with him, and then he was a very nice guy. We kept in touch, and he's like, "Hey, I'm happy to connect you with these guys if you're looking for something." So again, talking to anyone, not related to finance at all. And he connected me with these folks at Ling Feng Capital, and I interviewed with them, and then they agreed to have me come out there. And this was I think the grittiest part of my story. So I told you I was paying for school. the both these internships at this point, or so my fifth partner's summer was stipend. I didn't really get much pay. I didn't make any money on the experience. And then, I went back and was still working my Blue Line Deli-esque jobs. I'd graduated past that, but still working around campus. And so I didn't have a lot of money and I needed to go to Beijing. And their stipend, I think it was like something like $200 a month, which in
Gosh.
Beijing, Beijing's not New York, but it's definitely not a $200 a month city. So I got there and I literally had I literally had like $30 in my bank account for the first week. And I had booked or for the first 2 weeks. I got there mid-month. I
Yep.
had 2 weeks. I had $30 in my bank account, and I had booked a guy's futon in his living room on Airbnb. And so I'm in Beijing, $30 in my bank account. I remember going out and finding like these really cheap like steamed buns, and that's like what I ate every day.
Oh, so
Um,
good. Those are the
and
baozi.
it was awesome. Yeah, it was awesome. I'd like go get my steamed buns and I'd walk to
Yeah.
work, and they had lunch on campus, thankfully, and I'd
Mhm.
go back, and that was my life for the first 2 weeks until that lovely stipend hit, and I was able to extend my futon stay. And anyways, there was a point during that where the stipend wasn't quite enough, and I actually ended up sleeping on a park bench one night. But that one's yeah, that was
Wow.
I wouldn't recommend that one. I ended
No.
up crashing at a friend's house for the rest of the internship after that. But yeah,
Wow.
great experience. But you just got to hustle. You got to take you got to take advantage of these experiences while you're young. You can't do that when you get older. So do it while you're young. Talk to everyone. Do the crazy thing. You build a story, and then when you get back and it's time for like the real recruiting, you have an interesting story to tell, and that's what I think led to the Deutsche Bank opportunity.
I cannot believe that, Max. I am so glad I asked. What a story. So $30 in your bank account, sleeping on a park bench, doing your internship at this investing fund so you could build experience. That's absolutely insane. And actually, in some ways, not too different from my own story, since I did my banking internship while living out of my car. So, but that's a whole other
Yeah,
story
you
for another.
were you were kind of the You were kind of the North Star. Like if I had like a true North, like I said earlier, like I'd learned about you living in Chinatown, sleeping out of your car, and so I think I was just trying to replicate that, Max.
Truly, but not a
Um,
park bench in Beijing. That's a whole other level here. So, Max, that's wild, and so and it honestly makes the transition that much more incredible because you went from a $200 a month stipend at the random fund in China to New York City, great bulge bracket bank, Deutsche Bank. Like, let's talk about that move. How'd that happen?
yeah, so this one was a funny story. I look back. This is fun to talk about, and I think it's fun in retrospect because you can think of the highlights and make yourself sound so much more cool.
Yeah.
So just putting that caveat out for everyone. It's not that cool when you're in it. But this one was great. So this is now, so remember I had that mulligan freshman year, then I went through my
Hmm.
real freshman year. And so this is my now sophomore year.
Hmm.
And so still not eligible for junior internships, but there are some sophomore internships. And there's a guy, he was a notorious school alumni. He's done a lot for BYU, helping kids get out to New York, but he's also notorious for being, kind of hardcore, and there's been alleged stories of tears at times with this
Oh
guy.
gosh.
But anyway, I started this. So my sophomore year, I started the mathematical finance club at BYU.
Hmm.
I had no business doing that. I hadn't done any FX trading. I did a private equity internship in Beijing. But there were a couple kids who were studying quant trading and interested in PhDs and econ, things like that. So we got together in a classroom and started this club. And so anyways, I sit down. So this school alumni comes to campus, and he has kids come through. You get like 10 to 15 minutes with this guy. He has like 2 hour blocks. So there's what, like 10 kids get to go in and chat with him. And I go in, and he asked me something super generic, literally like one question, like what are your strengths? To which I gave my pre-rehearsed answer. Can't remember what it was. Something, like I work hard and I'm handsome. No, but I just whatever my pre-rehearsed answer was. And he's like, that answer was fine. Actually, that was bad. And I remember this very clearly. He looks down at my resume, and I had like at the top of my resume, like coursework, like, C++, CS142 or whatever. He's like, actually C++. I give that answer as C++. And I was like, dang, and I think most people like get a little like antsy, but I think I kind of like, to me, it was a little funny. Is like the aggression was hilarious because he's just a guy. Like he's a really he's a very hardworking, impressive guy, but like he's just a guy. And so I like kind of sat there. I was like, thank you for the feedback. Mind if I try again? I guess I did a bit better the second time, but that was it. Like it was those two questions, like what are your strengths? And then I asked for a rerun, and then that was it. He's like, all right, well, cool. Like let's keep, I'll reach out if anything shows up, whatever. And I go about my day. And then 1 week later, I get a text, and it's just he's like, hey, this is X. Here's a link. Fill in this application. And anyways, long story short, filled in the application. This is for like the FX. This is for the S&T where I like went to the FX derivatives desk. I watched The Big Short that night. I like fly out to New York like 2 days later. No, I've been doing prep at the Mathematical Finance Club. But yeah, that was part of my prep.
Yeah.
And I hop on a plane. I go to New York. First night staying in like a hotel. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much better than the park bench. That hotel was right next to the McKinsey office. So I remember every day I'd go into the McKinsey office. I'd be like, that's where I stayed. That was incredible. But anyways, I stay in the hotel. Interviews go well. And a little bit later, I was chatting with him. And he's actually the nicest guy. He just, he wants to make sure he gets the good ones. And he told me the reason that he took a chance on me is, A, I gave you some pretty harsh feedback and you took it in stride. And then B, he said the mathematical finance thing was pretty cool. And then I saw you speak Chinese and you spent some time in China. So, thought you were a sharp kid. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. So that's kind of why he took a chance on me and helped tee me up for that interview process.
That's great. And it goes back to that process of just like curiosity paying dividends that we're talking about. But help us like break it down a little bit, because I've seen The Big Short. It's a great movie. I'm sure a lot of people have, but this concept of like sales and trading and derivatives is still very obscure. It's like probably one of the most like abstruse concepts or like parts of finance that like people just don't really understand what it looks like. And so break it down for me. Like, what does the day to day of a sales and trading desk actually look like?
Yeah. Let me go back in my memory. So I think from like a lifestyle, I'll give you the shape of the day, and then we can, if you want to, we can talk a little bit more about what I've observed them to do. So the shape of the day is they're in before markets open and they leave after markets closed, but it is a little bit more of like a set start finish. And then, there's a bunch of different desks. And so the way the S&T, I found S&T to be fascinating. I think there's so many different things that happen there. But the FX desk specifically, what I did as an intern and what they actually do is quite different. I, as an intern, was like studying like what are derivatives, like how do these work, and then some of the more like exotic derivatives. Just like I just spent a lot of time trying to like understand what they actually are and how they work. But basically, it's just like anything at a bank. You're facilitating transactions, right? Like if you're doing M&A, you're facilitating, transactions. You're helping with the transaction process. This is the same thing, but it's like different funds or different investors trading back and forth derivatives. So you can first, like they underwrite, so they create these financial instruments, and then the other one is they help trade them. They become they're what you call a market maker. And so you have X fund trying to sell, Y asset, and then you basically take it to the market and you help connect the parties. You bring it on I think banks, they often bring it on their balance sheet for a moment. But they, the idea is that they're helping facilitate the trade and take like a small fee for that. So it's really interesting. But what was most fascinating to me wasn't just like, how does the FX derivatives desk work? It was more like, I realized everything in America, and this was the biggest learning I had there, everything in America is viewed as a cash stream and bundled up and traded. that was kind of my takeaway from the summer. I was like it doesn't matter, like the mortgage backed security desk is the one that did it for me, because I was like, oh my goodness, like every mortgage in the world is just traded around. Like
Yeah.
it was such a mind bender for me that like everything is people look at cash flows and they like attach a value to it and they trade it, and that's how America works. That's how capitalism works, and that was just very, very interesting to me. So yeah.
Well, and I'm probably
I don't know if I answered your question. What was your question? What's the day to day?
Yeah. What was the day-to-day of S&T? But we went in a lot of fun directions there, and I'm going to push back. I doubt everything in America is perceived only as a series of cash flows, but a lot of things are. And I think it's like it's everything that has money dollars attached to it. Like this securitization and asset-backed industry is like it's crazy. It's like it's credit cards, it's home loans, it's car loans, it's any time that anyone owes money to someone else that is like then turned into these very complex financial products. But that's incredibly fascinating.
That's a great caveat, Max. Yes, not everything is viewed as not everything's viewed that way, and it shouldn't be. And I like to think of myself as pretty altruistic, but at least from a business standpoint, I was like, oh, cash flows are epic, and like if I can learn how to generate cash, like generate revenue, generate profit, like that's valuable to people. That's extraordinarily valuable, and so that was like a huge learning for me, at least from like a business standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, that actually triggers a book that I just really, really enjoyed recently called What Money Can't Buy. It's subtitled The Moral Limits of Markets. And this is by one of my favorite ethicists. He's a professor at Harvard. And he like talks about the fact that like almost everything in America and in society has been switched into like a market where it's like you can buy and you can sell it. And there are commodities for things that like you wouldn't think are a commodity, like your home. Like your home shouldn't necessarily be a commodity, but it is. And so he's talking about like the ways that we think about markets and whether it's gone too far in some situations and like where we don't allow markets, like buying and selling kidneys or something like that. And highly recommend that if you haven't checked it out. So.
No, I love that. And like, yeah, this might be a rabbit hole. We can get back to the main talking points here in a second, but I like to think, like I said, I think of myself as an altruistic person. Like I have a nonprofit. We do a lot of work in like Guatemala, it's actually essentially just UBI. We just like distribute money to like single mother families, and, in hopes that their kids will stay in school. And it's, I feel like I'm an altruistic person, but I think like grounding myself in the realities of some of like how the system currently operates. Once you accept a lot of these principles as like, almost like laws of physics. Like I'm not mad that gravity is what gravity is. I'm not mad that cash flows are valuable. Like once you ground yourself in the system, you can kind of become, you can like start to build businesses or like build initiatives that like kind of work within those bounds and can hopefully shape the future in a positive direction. So that's kind of more what I meant when I walked away with this realization of like, everything's just a cash flow and it's bundled up and, traded on Wall Street. Like that is kind of like, it's like a hard pill, I think, especially for me, where I was the guy who like early days Tesla, everyone in my strategy class was like, Tesla's, they're going to go bankrupt, horrible business, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, the guy makes electric cars. Like it's sick. It's like, don't worry about it. It'll work out. And so, but like realizing, no, cash flow is very important. And like, if you can wrap your mind around that and be okay with the system, you can start to do things within the system that make the world a better place, hopefully. So anyways.
I love that. No, it's such a fascinating and personal digression. So thank you for sharing. But like a lot of people go and they see the system and they're like, wow, that's too big. That's too many trillions of dollars like flowing around that I don't understand. I reject that. But you're saying, no, I'm going to try and do good within it. And I really admire that mindset of, well, is like not losing hope in sight of this idea of like providing UBI to single mothers in Guatemala. Like that's an incredible thing to do. I'd love to hear more about that. But I also simply have to hear more about some of the entrepreneurial endeavors that you went on since then. Because in between banking and deciding to leave banking and go to McKinsey, you actually founded a real estate investing company, which is not something people normally do in college. And so the shift there from, sandwich maker at the deli to sleeping on a park bench in Beijing to working in sales and trading to founding a real estate company, like how in the world did that come about?
Yeah, curiosity and FOMO, man. I think that's like the common thread. So leaving, so I had the at this point now I've done fifth partners, where I was very operational. I went and did the Beijing thing, which impact on the team. Chinese analysts probably could have done the job a little better than I did in English, but it was a great experience, adventure. Went to Deutsche Bank, sales and trading. I loved the intellectual exercise of Deutsche Bank, but and I loved some of the learnings I walked away with, like what we just talked about. But I was like, I want to be a builder. I want to be an operator. That's why I switched to math. That's where I want to go. And so I jumped into this business, and so the founder, he was a very ambitious, kind of brave college student, and I think I could feel that, like when I talked to him. We'd been in touch for a while. We'd always kind of spitball like startup ideas, but he was very ambitious and very eager to like do something, and he was actually doing something. And there was this opportunity to join forces with him. And I think there's often students who like talk about ideas, and very seldom there's students that actually go do ideas. And he was doing it. Now, looking back on it, like, were we the best team? I think we were both very inexperienced at the time, but like that's one thing that was very, very attractive to me about him, is that he was doing it. And so I took this swing, and I dropped out of school for a bit to pursue this idea with him. What the idea was, it started off where we did like a lease to sublease model on Airbnb. So this is like, I don't know if you ever, Sonder or like Stay Alfred. There were like these companies that were essentially like Airbnb native hotel chains.
Yep.
And so this is right at that time. We were more of like a bootstrapped version of that, where we leased and subleased some units to start. It's actually a pretty large portfolio for just like a few students doing this. And then we basically, what we found out is that it was a very low margin business. And so what we did is we pivoted and we started syndicating real estate projects. And so we bought a couple syndicates in Nashville and some other areas, and it looked like it was going to do very well at first, and then COVID hit, and really took the wind out of our sails. And so we were bleeding revenue. It was really tough. So we sold off that real estate, sold off our real estate, got our investors their money back, and anyways, and then shortly thereafter, I pivoted, and I went and did something else, went to McKinsey. And so, but it was like a 3.5 year run that was just super exhilarating, really fun. I learned a ton. I learned what it's like to build. I learned what it's like to have like difficult conversations. There's so much that happens in startups behind this. It's such a grind to get something from 0 to 1. And I think there's no way to learn those lessons other than to just do them. So I'm so grateful I had that opportunity to do that young, to hire, to fire, to just experience all of that. So that's the long story. Happy to dive in anywhere that seems interesting to you.
Yeah. Well, I think first off, you gotta give us some stats here. Like, how big did it get in terms of like number of properties? And then what was that like to pull that all apart?
I think at the peak of things, or like overall, like we managed around 50 doors. So it wasn't massive, but it was very big for a like student run venture. So that was that was fun. We syndicated the two big syndicates we did were in Nashville, and so those ones, I want to say it was like total. I think it was like, it's been a few years, but I want to say it was close to like $10 to $15 million total assets. And so like, obviously we raised like 25% of that. So it was like, it was like real deals we were doing. These weren't like pretend deals. We actually went out and we really had to raise money, which was, tough as a sophomore or a fresh, or what was I, like sophomore, junior, something like that at this point. So those are some of the metrics, but I think the ones that are more interesting is like, just when COVID hit, man, like we had 80% revenue reduction literally overnight, and we were just bleeding money. And so getting to go like work out forbearances with banks, and like having to like communicate and work with investors on that, and like seeing some of the hardship that comes when business gets hard with partners and things like that. It was like really interesting experience.
Yeah, it sounds like a terribly difficult experience, but interesting is one word for it. But first off, I just got to say, like, I remember seeing this from the outside and just like watching you build this company over those years and being like, oh my gosh, like here's someone, like you said, who's not just talking about something, but who's actually doing something, who's grinding it out and has 50 doors. Like that's incredible for like an undergrad who dropped out of school, like as a freshman or sophomore, like to build a company like that. Really, really impressive. And I imagine that's got to be pretty gutting to like have a totally like macro event that you had nothing to do with. It wasn't like a misexecution that just kind of tore that away. And so how do you think about this? Like,
yeah,
if COVID hadn't happened, do you think you'd still be running this property management business?
This is a good question. I think about this a lot. So I think so. My partner, by the way, who I credit with a lot of the ambition and audacity to go out and like really tackle deals and like make a lot of this happen. He had a lot of the, I'd say like the ambition going for like pushing this ahead. And then I helped do a lot of the execution. I would say, would we still be doing this together? So he still works in real estate and does some similar stuff. It's a bit separate, but I think it wasn't ultimately the industry I wanted to be in. You know, I studied math and I wanted to do something more technical, and I was always fascinated by the big picture things, you know? And so there were a couple years there where I was like, oh, we're figuring this out and then we're going to raise money and we're going to go big. And then I think, did we have the team to do that and the skill set at the time? I don't think so, hindsight. I think we had the ambition though. But what happened is I think after COVID hit and after, you know, a few exhausting pivots, because we went lease to sublease and then once our business, like then we went lease sublease to acquisition. And then from acquisition, COVID hit, destroyed us. We sold those off. And then we were like, all right, what are we going to do next? And we started looking to buy vacation companies. You know, those were three big pivots and then like massive, like, you know, just really difficult financial outcomes for the first couple years. And I think we were a bit exhausted. And I think specifically like that's when really the difference in kind of like vision started to come forward. And I think I was, you know, I wanted to be part of like a hockey stick startup. And I wanted to like keep like, you know, let's raise money, let's figure it out. We'll like learn to operate as we go. And I think my partner had like a vision for like a much more like kind of stable growth, you know, slow growing, but like very stable business. And so I think starting to see some of those differences in perspective prompted like, you know, that coupled with like ultimately my interests weren't in real estate at all. That kind of, I think, is what ultimately drove the decision to separate.
Certainly. And if you're not interested in real estate, it's less fun to be building a real estate business just because you got to follow where the energy is. Like there's one of our professors at Stanford who's notorious for saying like, don't do necessarily like what you're good at or bad at or like what makes money or what's prestigious or something like that. He says, Max, like go where your energy is. Like, what are you passionate about? What are you excited about? What are you interested in? Because whatever you do that, like odds are you're just going to be a lot better at it if you're naturally like excited to put in that extra 10 or 20 hours a week, like grinding on it. And that's honestly a huge part of why I've done so much with coaching is just because like that gives me so much energy. It's so much fun to me to like help students break into investment banking and private equity that like, you know, it's not as painful to me to do it 24/7 as if I was working in some industry that I like absolutely hated, you know?
No, Max, just to, you know, convey that he is a real one. He means it when he says that. Like I remember, so our school, BYU is a funny place because many of us go on these 2-year missions. So the average class, like the average student is older than elsewhere. And so, you know, I got back from my mission. And then on top of that, you know, I had this 5 turned into 6-year graduation timeline. Max, like he said, he got there and he did it in like 2.5 years. And I just, and not only that, but Max was having these incredible career outcomes. And so I just remember being like a 25-year-old or whatever I was, and like, not just me, but like a line of us in the Blue Line Deli, this, you know, place I worked. And then we went to network and we're all just lining up to talk to Max Adams, who's like, like 18. And we're all like these 25-year-olds like, so Max, like, how do we get into banking? Like, what's the secret? You know? And he's just like coaching us. I think Yeah, you did it for free for many years, so I'm happy you found a job doing it full time.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Well, that's a good story. I forgot about those days, and it was it came from a place of passion for like learning and teaching, in the same way that you're curious. Like I'm curious, and I love helping other people with their curiosity too. But that leads me to the next point, which is like I'm so curious to hear how this incredibly diverse background across banking and real estate and finance in China ended up in perhaps the most conventional of all industries, consulting, at the most conventional blue chip of all firms, McKinsey. And so what in the world happened? Like where did you
Yeah.
decide to go to consulting from investment banking?
Okay. So there's a few things that happened here, okay? So one, I told you the journey with the startup, which those are actually funny to rehash because that's a very emotional process when you put so much into something. So that like I was starting to have like these kind of feelings like I should look elsewhere on that front. And then my wife, who you should interview instead of me, by the way, she's much more intelligent, but she got a investment banking internship. So we got married young while I was doing my startup kind of in school, and then she was solidly in school. She got an investment banking internship, and I was like, well, this is interesting. I have this startup, a lot of kind of open questions. She just got a real job. And I was like, all right, maybe I was a little bit competitive. Maybe if I'm transparent. It doesn't matter because she's always made so much more than me. It's fine. But anyways, I was like, all right, I'm gonna like try and get a real job. So that's when I opened up my phone. I think I called you. I called like a dozen old classmates who were all, they'd graduated and they were out in the field now working at, in banking or whatever else. And I talked to one guy, really good friend, and he's like, hey Max, look, I think banking, you'd be great at it. I know you have some network there, but you should explore consulting. I think he'd seen me do a lot of operational stuff and kind of the variety of projects I'd taken on. And he's like, I think you might have a lot more fun there, honestly. It might be more fit for you. And so that was it. He said that my wife was going into banking. I thought this could be like complementary. We don't have to like compare deals every night. And then my wife's best friend in college, she was going to McKinsey, and she said, hey, there's actually this off-cycle process. For context, I'm like literally taking my last two math courses off cycle. So like it's like winter semester. I'm about to graduate in like a month or two. And I don't have a job. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to leave my startup. And so there's this off cycle. I throw my resume in the bucket, and it worked out. And that's how I ended up at McKinsey. So I would say, long story short, feelings, I need to leave this startup. This is not the path for me. My wife kind of getting her job and realizing, okay, life's moving forward. Like, we're probably going to go end up on the West Coast or in New York. Let me like look for roles there. And then this third thing of like, I really want to be an entrepreneur again. And I feel like the biggest gap I have to cover is like rigor, like learning how to operate things at like a really high level, really high caliber. And so I was like, I need to go put myself in a pressure cooker for a few years. Because as you've been able to tell from this interview, I think I'm a little bit more on the adventurous side of things. And I think sometimes I lacked like the attention to detail and the rigor that I could get from a job like this.
Yeah. Well, and that's
So that's how I ended up there.
necessary to succeed at McKinsey. But that is, again, Max, all these stories are just like absolutely absurd. Because I don't think I realized in retrospect that you were about to graduate and you just kind of tossed in a resume to consulting. Probably this was like one of the first consulting firms you'd interviewed with, and you landed a job at McKinsey. That's incredible. And also going back to what you're saying about not replicable processes, I'm not going to recommend that to any of our students who are interested in breaking into consulting or investment banking. So don't take that particular lesson to heart.
Max, I know like we're focused on Wall Street, but I'm going to give the little plug for consulting just in case any of your students have the question.
Please.
Consulting is actually so the off cycle late in the year that I had, that I was very fortunate. Like there's no question. And I'm trying to give exact timelines. Like I think I was definitely off the normal. I think it was the winter semester. So I think I was like 2 or 3 months from graduation. I think I said that correctly. And I did only throw my resume in at McKinsey. And so that was like the only job application I filled out. And so I was incredibly lucky it worked. But I do think that consulting actually appreciates kind of a divergent path as long as you're intentional with what you do. And the other thing is, which is probably a testament to banking, is like if you have experience in finance, that's such a high pressure job, such a high pressure experience that I think consultants appreciate that. And so I think I actually had a lot of like interesting things on my resume, like math, finance background. Did this startup very intentionally, and you don't really need an internship in consulting to get a full time job. And so I think it actually all worked out quite good for the consulting profile.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But I was late in the game, that's for sure.
it is like a little bit of a less like ridiculously early process than investment banking, where honestly, a lot of the students I work with these days are freshmen prepping for like the sophomore year recruiting cycle, or even honestly, we work with high schoolers who are trying to like really get an edge so that they can set foot on campus, start getting the internship, start joining the right clubs, and prepping. And so I totally agree that the consulting model of recruiting like makes more sense to like do it a little bit closer once the students have like had a chance to learn what they're interested in. But I want to hear briefly like what's the pitch on doing consulting versus doing investment banking? Because you'd seen both. You like went to a great bulge bracket bank, but then you decided to do consulting. So like, why should someone choose consulting over investment banking or vice versa?
Am I allowed to be honest here, Max? I don't want to detract your classmates.
You can. I can defend against any
No,
point you say here,
okay.
but go for it.
So let me, and I'm gonna give you one. I think all the consulting firms are a little bit different. So like
Yeah.
Bain, BCG, McKinsey, they all have their different quirks and flavors. Something that was true about McKinsey when I was recruiting, I think, the culture kind of like ebbs and flows over time, but I think is generally true about McKinsey is there's this term like make your own McKinsey. And so, not to sound like I think the Kool-Aid's still coming out of my system. I've only been gone for a few months now, but it was a perfect place for someone like me to explore everything under the sun. So I knew I wanted to do something technical. That last semester of college, I worked I worked in like a research group. We did like RSA encryption research on like some like edge cases. And so I was able to take that and go, say, hey, I have this experience. Can I join some cybersecurity projects? And like very quickly, I was able to do some cybersecurity work. I did, some work in private equity. I did like a lot of private equity due diligences on like the most crazy companies you can think of, like a weather data company, a DNS company, which these are like companies that you just like don't really hear about. It's super interesting. The other one, and then ultimately where I was able to kind of like build my home, that's what we call it. That's what it's called when you kind of find like your niche. I was able to become like a leader and manage projects in Web3. So I was able to work in the Middle East building like a stable coin payment rail, which is just crazy. Like where else can you do that? And then ultimately I was able to kind of get in on the Gen AI wave, which is what I hope to kind of, follow the rest of my career. And I ended up in Taipei and Shanghai, working with a team of 20 engineers to like build these really cool cutting edge like use cases for like a $1 trillion laptop manufacturer. So I just like, it was like a little bit bittersweet for me to leave that. I knew like McKinsey, ultimately you're not building something that you own. You don't have a lot of control over things. It's not truly entrepreneurial in the way that I think of entrepreneurship. So I knew it wasn't my long-term home, but it gave me so much exposure that I just don't think I could have gotten anywhere else. And not just exposure to different industries, but like experience working in those industries with the people and like wrapping my heads around like just totally different topics. And like a little bit of leeway to chase buzzwords like, Web3 and AI. So it was really fun for me.
Okay, so let's distill that down a little bit. You're a consultant, so I'm going to make you put it in 3 bullet points here. Why should someone do consulting instead of investment banking? 3 sentences.
Adventure, for sure. So adventure, you can see as many things as you want to see. That's the first bullet point. The second bullet point is learning to problem solve across different spaces. So it's not the same formulaic thing every time.
Yeah.
You could be working on building out a sales org one day or building a blockchain another day. And then third. Let's just go with those two, Max. I'm gonna be a little different. I'm gonna just go with those
Okay.
two. Those are the big things for me.
That's your McKinsey advantage, is cutting out the third bullet point. It's very, very intelligent of you. Um,
Yeah,
but
I'm no
okay,
longer at McKinsey, so I can speak to this.
I think those are probably true in some ways. Like the learning to problem solve across different solutions is something that you can get to a degree in finance, but a lot of the times, like, you're doing the same task across a range of industries is how I describe it. And so your task is consistent,
Hmm.
your industry is different. And so, like, when I was working, even like within tech banking, it's like one day I was working on like a hardware manufacturer selling like HTC to Google. And the next day I was working on like a data analytics company selling Looker also to Google. And then the next day I was working on like sourcing a deal with like a rocket company, like Rocket Lab. And so these were very, very different types of transactions and very different industries, where I was learning about everything from like how does space tech work to like how does data analytics work. But I was doing the same fundamental process each time. Like, I was building a financial model, I was doing valuation, I was in Excel, I was in PowerPoint. And so I do think you're probably correct that there's a wider arrangement of problem sets in consulting. And that's honestly like something I can't rebut, except by saying that I can count on one hand the number of consultants who are billionaires, and I cannot do that with finance people. So mic drop on that
That is
point.
very true, man. That is super true. Yeah, no, I think like the magic of like consulting is like going for 2, 3, 4 years and then like moving on. Whereas like banking, no question. The other thing is like I have no matter what I want to do now, I have a little bit of an uphill battle where it's like, oh, they respect the fact that I worked at McKinsey, but like it's not incredibly obvious to them that I would be an incredible private equity associate, for example. I have a little bit of an uphill battle. You can do it, but you have to put in a little extra legwork. Whereas like if you go into banking, if you kind of jump into the standard path, you're a shoo-in for a lot of those outcomes. So if you know what you want, there's much more direct paths there than consulting.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, billionaires that's definitely
Not that that's the
that's
only
a
metric
that's a
of
desirable
success.
outcome for some, and that
Yeah, it's not necessarily the metric for success that you
yeah.
need to be shooting for here, but just like indicating that there is like a lot of potential to like scale your work in finance in a way that you can't scale with consulting, because it's very much like you solving problems, individual problems with your brain, which is not a scalable business model.
Yeah,
But you did exceptionally
very true.
well at it. Like you had a pretty fast trajectory at McKinsey. Like, I'm not as familiar with all of the consulting lingo of like what the titles mean, but you went from business analyst to senior business analyst to engagement manager in like a very short period of time. What do you think drove that acceleration? Like, how did you succeed so quickly at McKinsey?
Yeah, I think so. I think a couple things. Like my baseline, you guys heard all the experience I had before I went to McKinsey. So like when I started talking to McKinsey, I actually was talking to them as like a experienced hire is what they'd call it. I ended up getting shoved back into the undergrad bucket because I hadn't graduated college. But I think I had like a solid base going into it, and I'd seen a lot of things, done a lot of things professionally. But then I think like at the firm, I just like I genuinely enjoyed it. I think I didn't enjoy everything about it. I think there's like there's some over engineering and optics things that I don't care for, but like I genuinely enjoyed a lot of the industries and people I was working with, and so I got along with the people. I enjoyed the work. I really enjoyed like connecting with clients. Like that was, I think, anything professional services, you have to enjoy working with clients, and I did well at that. And yeah, and I think people liked me back, so I was very fortunate in that regard. But ultimately, I think all of that doesn't matter if you don't just work. And I just tried to work as much as I could and to just be excellent. And I think that's something that's ultimately very controllable, is just go do a good job. Just stay in the office, stay at your desk until you've like figured it out. And it may take you a few months to figure it out. I would say my uptick, like at the very beginning of my analyst days, I'd say it was slower than the other analysts. It didn't come as naturally to me. But then I hit like this point where like it clicked. I'd learned what we called the toolkit. And then all of those intrinsic enjoyments I have, like working with people, the clients, like, having a fun energy in the team room, those kinds of things all of a sudden mattered. And then the rest I kind of accelerated through.
I love that. Yeah. And so you're saying that again, you start out slower, like on a slower trajectory potentially than a lot of your classmates. But
Yeah,
again, it goes back to this concept of like following your energy that we've been talking about. And the fact that your energy is curiosity and learning, which is
100%.
why consulting was such a good match for you. And that eventually won out over the skill sets. So that's just another data point that shows like if you follow your energy and where you're interested, like again, you're going to be able to build the skill sets 99% of the time. And so that just enabled you to really accelerate because you had the passion for it.
Yeah. My friend actually always teases me. He's like, "You're the only person in McKinsey history to make engagement manager by working, like to make engagement manager in New York by only working in the Middle East and in China." And so, so yeah, I just think like following your energy and like building relationships and doing good work is like there's just no substitute.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I love that. And you followed your energy most recently into the world of AI, which is something we have to spend at least a few minutes talking about. So let's pivot the conversation there a little bit, because toward the end of your time at McKinsey, you ended up at their ultra prestigious, ultra famous, Quantum Black AI consulting arm. And so from what I understand, this is very hard to do. Like I bet everybody at McKinsey wants to work on this right now. You can tell me if that's true. But why did you decide to work at Quantum Black specifically, and how did you manage to make that pivot? What sort of stuff did you work on?
Yeah. So a couple qualifiers. So my prior colleagues don't like get mad at me. There are people coming on the Quantum Black track, and they're highly technical, like data scientists from day one, right? That wasn't me. I went in as a standard consultant, which is kind of what you think when you think of. They call it the integrative track, which is just the standard McKinsey track. And so I don't claim to be one of those guys, but I did work the last like 12 months at the firm. I was part of this Quantum Black practice, and I was driving a project with, like I said, 20 engineers building these AI use cases. Um, and your question was, how did I get there? Like, what was the
Yeah.
process for getting
How,
there?
why, and what it looked like.
Yeah. So the how is curiosity. So again, this has been a theme for me, Max, is talking to people, talking to sometimes random people, and just keeping in touch with them. So I remember I was still on campus at BYU. So I'd gotten the job. My wife was still in school. She had like a semester left. So I was working from Utah, flying out to clients. I was at the gym at BYU, hopped on a Zoom call with this guy who was a partner in Taiwan just because I loved Taiwan. I did my mission there. I always wanted to go back. So I talked to him. I was still on campus. So it was like the first 3 months at the firm. And I kept in touch with him all the way until this last project. I never worked with him, but we always kept in touch. And then I went on paternity leave October of 2024, and I connected with him. We were in Singapore visiting my in-laws, and I connected with him, and he's like, "Hey, we have a project in Taiwan. We'd like for you to come help us out." I had a little bit of background in AI. It was like an AI Quantum Black project. Just because we'd kept in touch, he like pulled me over to Taiwan for this project. And so, the project I was at this very critical period in my time at McKinsey where I was on trajectory to make engagement manager. But the way you typically do that is you play it safe, like work with partners in your office, build your network at your office so people kind of like sponsor you, they call it, and you make it to the next level. But I was like, there's no way. Like the adventure of Taiwan and Shanghai, like that's incredible. And then not only that, but I've been doing all these AI strategy projects that are fluffy slide decks. I actually get to go build stuff. Like there's no way I'm missing this. And so my wife and daughter were nice enough to follow me, and they lived in a hotel room for, you know, 7 months while we worked on this project together in Taiwan. And so that's the how, was just keeping in touch with people and having a wife and family that was supportive to move halfway around the world. But then what did we do, and why did I do it? I knew, it's just been very obvious. Anyone who has, ears or eyes over the last 36 months, like AI is changing everything. And I think the opportunity to get close to scientists, like it resonated with my mathematics background. It's something I feel like I could plug into, probably not technically, like there's research folks who are so far ahead of me in the space, but I could at least plug in from like a commercial business side. And this was the perfect opportunity to do it. So I just went for it. and I've really started to build a career out of it.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about like what sort of stuff that you were passionate about working on in AI, because it sounds like you were like, oh, I don't want to just do strategy decks and stuff like that. I want to go actually build. And so what sort of stuff were you most excited to be building in AI?
Yeah, so I'll start with this project is like kind of build the foundation of what I wanted to actually do in AI. So during this project, I was in charge of I was like the kind of the mouthpiece between the team of engineers and like the CTO or the CIO. And so I would build slide decks, report on like how we were doing. Like I would like do like sprint planning with them. So we were like making sure we were delivering things on time. So it was very much kind of like there was like product manager, program manager, kind of classic consulting work. That's what I was doing. And there started to be not every use case was super cool AI infused, but there were a couple that were very, very cool, very cutting edge. And I was fascinated by them, but I was doing all this consulting work, taking 60, 70 hours a week that I didn't have time to actually dig into like, what is the technology behind this? And so this is like, they were doing like a lot of agentic things before I like was hearing too much about agents on like my AI Daily Brief podcast. So it was very cool stuff. I feel like they were doing cool technology, but I wasn't able to get deep into it. And so I decided on my next job, I want to go somewhere where one, I have a little time to think and I'm expected to be an industry kind of content technical expert. And then two, I want to get back close to the entrepreneurs because that's where the real action is right now. Enterprise is still figuring out how to use AI, right? So like, I'm not going to learn about AI from enterprise standpoint. I need to go to the founders. And then three, I wanted to be deeply embedded in a community where I would actually have time with those founders. And so I found this perfect role at AWS that kind of meets all three of those where, I'm expected to understand the landscape. I'm expected to be able to help these entrepreneurs scale into enterprise and like really understand what are enterprise applications. And then I get time to like work hand in hand with them, which obviously is like meaningful to me because one day I hope to be an entrepreneur again.
Yeah, I love that. And no doubt that that's going to happen given how much curiosity drives you specifically, Max. That's just like inevitable in my mind. And so I'm very curious about your thoughts on AI because at this point, like you're kind of certifiably an expert on it. Like you worked at McKinsey for quite a while. You've been working at AWS helping generative AI startups. And so you've seen it from a very strategic lens that a lot of people who are working at an AI company or just on the outside like me probably don't get. And so tell me a little bit about like what are some of the trends that we should be watching in AI? And then I'm going to ask you a little bit more about how that's going to impact banking and consulting specifically. But just to start with, like what's on your mind in the world of AI right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's lots of little, technical trends and like kind of industry trends. And I think those are interesting. We can talk about those, but I think like more importantly, what's going to be important with AI is I think there's this feeling many people have right now where it's like AI is going to take white collar jobs. AI is going to take any job that requires thinking. Like, they're almost like it's a little doomsday. But I think the opposite's actually true. Well, no, I think that there will be some displacement. I think tomorrow looks different rather than worse. So I think I don't ever over-index on like the downsides. But I do think what is going to be critical is not to be less intelligent, but to be more intelligent. Like, these machines, they're machines at the end of the day. People still drive decisions. Even if we like assign a machine to make decisions for us, people still ultimately control capital. People still ultimately, drive demand in the market. Like our world is currently, and I predict it will be in the future built around people and like, people's decisions. And so, so what's happening now is knowledge is becoming commoditized. And so a lot of people are like, oh, these machines will think for me. And I'm afraid people are just going to kind of not engage academically as hard. They're going to like depend more on ChatGPT. They're going to depend on AI to do work for them. And that really scares me because I think what is really going to happen is because people still drive decisions, what's going to happen is the people who are still know how to think and use these tools to like learn how to think quicker and more in depth are going to come out ahead. And the people who think that these machines are going to take their jobs and things, they're going to fall behind because they'll just like kind of surrender some of their critical thinking. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's actually more important now than ever to train your mind. And I've seen it through some of the, I've helped with some of interviewing some of your students, Max, and the rate at which some of these kids are learning is incredible to me. Like we were talking about it before the call. Like some of them, I literally think they're 3 or 4 times ahead of where we were.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening. It's not, you know, yeah. And then there's the tactical thing of like learn to use agents. Like if you can multiply yourself by 50, you should, that's like it's a great asset. But yeah, I think just engaging in critical thinking and not just depending and outsourcing to models is one, and then learning to use the technology is another.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk more about each of those things. I want to talk about three specific things. First off, I want to hear your prognostication for how this is going to impact specifically the investment banking analyst role. You can talk about consulting too if you want to, but I'm particularly curious about what will AI do to the investment banking analyst role. And then I want to talk about how to build those critical thinking skills so you can succeed across whatever it is you're doing. And then I want to talk tactically, like how we should be using agents more. But starting off, what is AI going to do to the investment banking analyst role?
It's a very interesting question. I think it's going to change the consulting analyst role a lot more than the banking analyst role, because I think my personal perspective is banking is still very much, it's almost exclusively a people business when it comes down to it. It's like building the model. And Max, you correct me if I'm wrong. You spent a lot of time there. Like building the model is one thing, and that, a lot of that's kind of formulaic, maybe like highly automatable. But I think really what you're doing when you're adjusting the model is adjusting to find like evaluation that all parties agree with, roughly, something like that. And I don't know if that's absolutely right. Like I know you have to like actually have kind of what do you have conviction behind as a banker, but it's really getting people in line to make a decision, and that specific function's not going to go away in my view. What is going to go away is a lot of the, call it BS slides that surround it, right? It's not going to go away, but you're just going to be able to create more BS slides more quickly. And so you can have people that feel and are perhaps more educated as they try to come to that decision, but that art of getting people to make the decision is still going to be, that's a people business. And so I do think banking is tied pretty directly to people. Private equity is the same thing, right? Like you can have more industry research, you can have better industry research. That's great. You should do it because your competitors are. But ultimately, you're trying to get people to make a decision together. So I think banking, it's interesting. You need to be the best analyst. You need to be able to use these tools incredibly well. But I don't think that your job's as in jeopardy as others. I think it's just going to become more competitive because other analysts are getting good at using these tools. And because now more people can compete with you because more people have access to information.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point that I've noticed where to some extent AI is the great leveler. AI is the great leveler because it enables people who come from non-target schools who didn't go to Wharton or like have an investment banking club at their school to learn how to do investment banking just about as well as the people that do have that. And so that's why I think that like the coaching model that Wall Street Mastermind has that teaches people how to think and how to use these tools and also how to like elevate their competition to degrees that AI can't coach are so much more important than it used to be. But in terms of like how AI is going to impact the analyst role, I really do actually agree with your prognostication here, which is I think that there's going to be two main things that are going to happen. The first is that you're going to do less grunt work. Like there's just no world in my mind where we're going to have highly paid people. Like you're not going to have a super, super smart kid coming out of BYU and dragging logos onto slides for $150,000 or $200,000 a year. That's just such a waste of everyone's time. And you still need those logo slides, but that's just going to be automated. And so I'm really excited because the first thing is you're going to have analysts doing less grunt work, which means that you're going to be able to do more deals and more interesting work early on. And then the second thing that I think is going to happen is there's probably going to be some reduction in total force needed. Like I don't know that it's going to be quite as much of a pyramid anymore as it is going to be like a sort of straight up and down. I don't know what that'd be called, like a monolith or something like that. Because at the end of the day, like you said, this is a people business.
Yeah.
Especially at the top, you're going to need people at the top.
A true totem pole.
A totem pole, exactly. You're going to need someone there who can give you confidence that this is going to be a good $10 billion deal and who's going to look at the numbers, make sure that the AI is not messing up. And honestly, like I don't see banks having a huge incentive to get rid of their analyst classes given that, because that's not the cost lever. Like when I was at Lazard, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're paying me 150 plus $1,000 a year to like do this. This is crazy. Like that's so much money. But for a bank that's making billions and billions of dollars of profit, that's a rounding error. They don't really care about that in terms of profitability relative to what they care about, like the managing director pay or the senior partner pay. And so realistically, I don't think that there's going to be huge pressure to get rid of that highly valuable analyst pipeline of talent there. But this brings us to the next question that I wanted to ask you. This does highly increase the need to be a critical thinker, because your value is not going to come from building slides well. It's not going to come from attention to detail and formatting as much. It's not even going to come from being like a good model junkie, even though that's going to take a while for Excel to, or like AI to be good at models. Because like today it cannot do that. It's not even close. Like it's going to be at least a few years in my book. But how can you develop the critical thinking skills to withstand the age of AI?
This is a good question, man. I'm sure I'm still trying to figure this one out. Because like just to voice back the challenge to you, I've actually been, so my brother's a developer and we chat frequently. We're always working on like little projects together and things. And he's been a developer now for like over a decade or close to a decade. And there used to be a world where if I wanted to become a developer tomorrow, I would go and I would start, looking up online courses, whatever it is, like teaching myself to code. And AI makes it so much more difficult because AI just does it for you. And so like to cross that gap and to scale up to where my brother is, I used to be able to do it brick by brick, but now it's like there's this gap between where he is and where I am. And in the middle is this massive black hole of like, just like outsourcing stuff. And so like, it's like, can I actually ever be the guy who can be the human in the loop at the end of the day? Signing off the code and sending it to production because it's because you've gone through it and you understand it and you actually understand the language and you like can give an honest signature. For me, I can do almost everything my brother can do using AI, but then I don't have the technical expertise at the end of the day to say like, yeah, this looks good, let's send it, and that's simplification. He's still much more capable than I am, but like it is a big problem, man. And I think this is just me thinking. I don't know if this is the right answer, but I think a lot of the way that kids need to approach this going forward is they need to keep going to the same school as we went to, which is like they need to like accelerate the learning, perhaps using AI, like learn the content quicker. You can do that, but then you need to drill it the same way. You need to just do not ever have ChatGPT up during an interview ever. Like you need to be able to speak to each problem front to back, and you need to be able to like regurgitate the information back to a friend, quiz each other, test each other, because you have this opportunity to get exposed to the content much quicker. You need to like build your ability to master content, which is done through like testing. And so I just think it's like, I don't think there's like a magic answer to it. I think you have to master that content. I had two other thoughts. Are you okay if I share them?
Go for it.
Okay. So the first one, this was a conversation I was having with like a developer at AWS recently. Super smart guy, really like one of those hyper technical folks that like you don't get exposed to unless you're like in the math lab or at AWS or some place like that. He was talking. I was talking to him. I heard this on a podcast. It was like, I can't remember, Matthew McConaughey or someone said like, AI is not going to replace people with taste or something like that. Like people who are artistic, have taste, have like kind of vision. AI is not going to replace those people. And this developer said the same thing. He said, he like quoted the same quote that I heard on the podcast, and then he added to it. And it's the same for developers. Like developers have style, and like that style is what AI can't replace. And I think that's going to be kind of true across all industries. Like in finance, a lot of like, I think the style that emerges for more senior bankers, at least from what I've seen, is the style and the way they work with the client. And like AI can't replace that. And so what is your task when you're young is you need to develop that quicker. You now have this way to, master content in a more accelerated fashion. What you need to also do is develop yourself as a person and your ability to work with people earlier. And so, and that kind of leads me to the other idea where I was talking to this partner. He's an ex-partner at McKinsey, super smart guy, and he's like, in a world where everything operational, everything content becomes a commodity, what are you left with? And he said, your people. And so the asset of the future is for companies to amass large groups of intelligent and interesting people. And so I think that was like very interesting as well. Is like, are you developing yourself holistically? Are you like an interesting person to talk to? Like that might be as critical to getting into banking in the future as like understanding, the 400 question guide. Is like, are you someone who people are stoked to be around?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I don't know.
the EQ over IQ. And so I just want to echo that, like, because I wholeheartedly agree, Max, that in a world where a lot of the rote tasks of banking and consulting and every other job are going to be automated, at the end of the day, the part that the AI can't do is it can't like look at a client, shake their hand, build a relationship, and do the same with colleagues and like actually have the EQ to manage people, manage organizations. And AI can assist those things and absolutely should. And I don't want to come across as an anti-AI person, because realistically, the people who are going to be successful are the ones who are using their own IQ and EQ paired with AI. But I also do want to suggest two quick resources that this conversation triggered for me early on when I was deliberately trying to build this skill set of thinking clearly. The first is, well, actually three. The first is behavioral economics. Like one of the biggest things that I ever did with my brain was study the ways that it fails. And so behavioral economics is the discipline of understanding like the heuristics that we use to make decisions and understanding the areas where our brains make bad decisions. And so by understanding those flaw patterns, I've been able to correct them in myself more and more over time. And of course, you never get there perfectly. You never even get there partially perfectly, but you get a little bit better. Then the second resource that really helped me was a blog called Farnham Street. Have you ever heard of this one?
No, I'm writing them down though.
Okay, because this one is super interesting, where it basically provides mental models. And so instead of like expecting you to like learn the entire world of pure mathematics and then apply that to consulting, and instead of expecting you to go and learn all of the different ways that like a physicist or like a doctor will think about problems and then apply that to whatever you're doing, it provides distilled insights into other industries and careers and provides you mental models of how they think about the world that you can then take back to yours. And so it helps you get kind of a liberal arts education of different industries and take it back to finance, take it back to consulting, whatever the case may be. The second thing that I always recommend to friends and family is a website called clearerthinking.org. And again, I'm not paid for any of this. These are just like good resources. And this website, basically what it does is it helps you understand like areas where you are personally inconsistent. So for example, they've got like a value of your time calculator that I love that says, okay, like Max, how much would you be willing to pay someone to like do an hour of work for you? And then it's like, okay, and how much would I have to pay you to do an extra hour of work? Or how much would I have to pay you to like go and do this thing that you didn't like versus this thing that you did like? And how much would you be willing to pay for like a tool that saved you that much time? And it helps you realize like, wait a second, my answers on these aren't consistent. And theoretically they should be. And so it helps you understand like all the different ways that like your brain works and doesn't work effectively. And I think that sort of critical thinking is going to be so important going forward. So I love that.
Love it. Yeah, and I think it's just like, just to reiterate, like I said, invest in yourself, EQ over IQ, all these things, right? But like at the end of the day, the client, when they talk to you, they're going to want to feel like you're smart. So it's like invest in yourself, but you still need to know content. It's just, there's no way around it.
Definitely. Well, the last thing that I'll say about this before we wrap up into our closing here is use of AI and use of agents is very important. And I think that the way that I would describe society is there's still probably, about a third of people or maybe more that like don't really use AI, don't really know much about AI. Maybe they're a little skeptical about it. And then there's probably about half of people, I would say, at least in the professional world these days, that are like using AI really regularly. and they've got GPT open. Maybe they like use a custom GPT every once in a while. Maybe they use a deep research mode every once in a while. But what are the people at the very top of the distribution doing to be AI experts and use these tools effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So I think this actually it differs by industry because I think the use cases are more built out in some industries than others. But specifically, let me talk tech for a minute. So my brother again. Sorry to reference my brother. He's just one of my close touch points. He has a laptop that he's always tinkering around with side projects and things, and he has a laptop that's running 24/7 from his kitchen, and then he takes one back to his. He obviously has a laptop at work where he's working, and so the one in his kitchen is running full time, building things, doing whatever whatever tasks he's assigned it that morning, and he gets texts from it when he needs to like approve something or like when it runs into an issue. So, he's literally augmented himself at least 2x, but he's running multiple agents. So, by however many X that is, that's increasingly common, things like that, for developers right now. For the rest of us in corporate America, I think that level of use is getting much closer. Like Anthropic just released some things this week that are going to make that can basically take control of your desktop. And so looking into some of those tools, I'm still familiarizing myself with those. But there's a lot of tools coming up that are useful. But I mean, there's basic things that we should all be doing. Like there's no reason you shouldn't have notes that are auto-populated after every single meeting you have. Like you should have, that should be done. You should have outsourced that by now. There's no reason you should be writing like emails top to bottom. Sometimes I think you do it for personal reasons. And I like I said, like I like the challenge of like still thinking critically. So sometimes I'll write a long email by myself. But you should be getting through your emails at least 50% quicker. There's a lot of things around like working in Salesforce. There's a lot of like little tips and tricks and like things that you can do. But it really varies task to task. So I would say as far as I think we're in a really exciting year. Like I literally think 2026, 2027 is when like the level of productivity that developers have been able to experience is going to start spilling over into more corporate roles. And so I'll let you know as I come across interesting tools, but the basics, like we should all be using transcribers to like, we should be able to talk to our computers like a friend. Like that's one thing that's table stakes actually is like, there's plenty of apps where you can just like, you have a thought, you click a button, you tell your computer your thought, it stores it where you want it. Like that level of like, opportunity is already there. And so, people should be using those types of things. Automating workflows, I think those are becoming more accessible to common folk like ourselves here who aren't super technically capable.
So, Max, there's a few questions I like to rapid fire ask to every person who comes on. And as we near the end of the conversation here, I'd just love to get your quick take on each of these three things. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so first off, what is the highest ROI habit, technique, or routine that you picked up on Wall Street that you still use today?
Don't deliver something unless it is rigorous.
Second, if we looked at your calendar and bank or credit card statement from the last month, what would it say that you actually value?
I think you would say I value saving, investing, and having fun with my wife and daughter.
And then last but not least, copying a question from the How I Built This podcast, how much of your success so far has been due to your hard work and skill, and how much is due to luck?
Oh, man. For sure, a lot of it's due to luck. I think every experience I've had so far has like some big kind of, funny story attached, right time, right place. But I think that's all built on a foundation of, you're talking to people, you're putting in the work, and you're willing to chase opportunity.
Well, Max, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today because we've gone through a lot. We've talked about some key themes here, and a few that really stand out to me are this concept of humility and hustle, where you're always willing to talk with people. At some point, like you had $30 in your bank account, you were sleeping on a park bench in Beijing, like hustling for these jobs, and like you didn't think you were too good for that. And I love that. The second thing that really just came through was following your energy. And so you're an extraordinarily curious person. It seems like you were able to follow your curiosity to a lot of different places throughout your career that led you from different parts of interesting sales and trading, investment banking to consulting, and now to the world of AI. But the last thing that really stands out that I really admire about this conversation is the dedication to altruism. Like the fact that you've been doing this while also sending money to like single women in Guatemala that are trying to raise kids, and that you have this like altruism lens permeating everything that you do, I imagine makes what you're doing a lot more meaningful. So I'd really encourage everyone who's seeing this to emulate some of these characteristics that Max demonstrates so well. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.